All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Today I'm going to present to you some research that I've conducted in my classroom on how to improve inferencing skills, and that is through the Think-Aloud strategy. In your packet, you have a copy of the PowerPoint as well as today's agenda. The very first slide of the PowerPoint just gives you a table of contents for the PowerPoint. It just directs you if you need to find certain information within the PowerPoint. Let's go over our agenda. First, we're going to review our vision statement. Then we're going to look at the identified problem that I found in my classroom. We're going to discuss the intervention research. We're going to discuss the intervention plan and how it was implemented. We're going to review the data and the results, and then we're going to do an overview of the summary and next steps. For this presentation, I developed a personal vision statement, what I want as a teacher. My vision as a teacher leader is to inspire my students to be strong thinkers and learners, to use their minds to problem solve and deeply reflect to increase reading comprehension in both academic and real world settings. I will strive to teach my students thinking strategies to help them grow as readers and problem solvers to meet or exceed proficiency. And that's what led me to the identified problem in my classroom. My co-teacher, Kelly Mel, and I, we sat down and talked about what do our students really need. We looked at past MAP scores and common assessments and classroom assessments, and they are still really struggling with making inferences, taking what's in the text and thinking between the lines a little bit further than what's on the actual page. We chose to go with our intervention group, which is about 20 students, and we split those in half. So I was focusing on a group of 10 students, and that 10 students, they had an average MAP score of 185, which is novice for 4th grade. Now this group of students also had 5th graders in it, so that's much lower than we want them to be. Based on common assessments, I looked at only the inferencing portion of their common assessments. On average, students were scoring about 35% on inferencing on their common assessments. Even though Ms. Mel and I are working almost daily on that skill in our Tier 1 instruction, we decided that we wanted to really target that in our interventions to make sure that students are able to think beyond what's on the page of a text, to really understand the story they're reading. To address that problem, we decided as a team, Ms. Mel and I, that the best way to approach it is through Think-Aloud strategies. And we wanted to incorporate picture books. And I'm going to address those in a second. But on this slide, there are 3 resources that I pulled from where I got some research. The first is an article about the Think-Aloud in a science classroom, which doesn't necessarily apply for my reading classroom, but the skills and the way they implemented it was very similar to how I wanted to, using multiple strategies into one Think-Aloud, and it showed really great results in the science classroom. Then next was a study where teachers learned how to do Think-Alouds. It walked us through the process of teachers learning to think aloud and planning Think-Alouds. And finally, the article that I use the most is called Improving the Quality of Think-Alouds. It is an article that takes you step by step on how to plan a Think-Aloud and how to successfully implement it. I was going to provide those articles for you, but they're about 10 pages each, and I decided to keep the forest strong. Some research on Think-Alouds. Think-Aloud is a teaching strategy which a proficient reader, in this case the teacher, verbally reports or models her thinking. So as I read, I'm explaining what's going on in my head to the students so they get a clear understanding of how they should be thinking when they read. It requires the reader to stop while they're reading, and these stops are planned so that the reader can address specific thought processes as they read. And the goal of Think-Aloud is to help students do it independently. So you're modeling, and then your end goal is for students to be able to go off and read and use the same thinking processes. And all that information is from Improving the Quality of Think-Alouds, the 3rd article on the past slide. In order to plan for this intervention, first I had to find appropriate texts. I did a lot of searching and read a lot of books, And I found that the best way for me to teach inferencing is to find very basic books. Books that have very few words, very few illustrations, which made you have to think in order to understand what was going on. As a teacher, I had to read and reread and reread the text so I can identify places where I need to stop and questions that I need to ask. In the article addressed earlier, they said you should always have a stack of Post-it notes with you whenever you're planning this, and that's kind of what I did. As I went, I put Post-it notes on the page with the thoughts and the questions I wanted to ask myself. 4 texts I used during this intervention was Ish. That was a book that we actually read in class previously, so they were very familiar with the story, so taking their thinking a little bit further, I was hoping that that book would be an easy gateway into a Think-Aloud. We also read The Giving Tree, I Want My Hat Back, and Fox, and all those books are on the table if you want to look at those at some point. And then I used a different type of assessment every day whenever I implemented this, just so I gave students different ways they could show their learning. The first one was a quick write, then an exit slip that had 3 questions, a short answer which I scaffolded with sentence stems, discussion questions, and then our final assessment was a multiple choice assessment. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but this lays out the plan. Most of my pre-assessment data was from those common assessments, but I had those 5th graders that I didn't have that data on. So the first day when I read Ish, I did a little bit of a think-aloud, but I didn't engage as much with the students as I had planned to later, just to see how they were able to think. And again, they've read this book before, so it's something they were familiar with. And I used that quick write as a pre-assessment for those 5th graders. I implemented this 3 times. The first time with The Giving Tree. As I read through the book, I'd stop and I'd look at the illustrations and the words, and I would discuss what I was thinking. And then after a while, I'll start asking students, what do you think about this? Or what is the character doing? Or why is the character doing this? Trying to get them to respond and be a part of the thinking. And they were very eager to participate, which was really great. But I noticed that the more I did that and I just let them go with it, the further their thinking went out. And it was almost taking away from the text. So the next day when I implemented it, I read I Want My Hat Back, which was a really cute book. And as I read it, I made sure that we kept everything based in the text. So I was explicitly looking at, here's the evidence for my inference, where's the evidence for yours? And the third implementation, I read Fox, which is much more complex than the other 2. But we were able to really get into it and really think about those processes. And then finally, their final assessment was on Fox. We did a second read aloud of that. And this kind of goes into more detail of how it was implemented. As I said, the first day I implemented it, I actually did a mini lesson on inferencing. I explained to them the process that I was about to do. I was explaining that I am going to show you my thinking, and I want you to be able to think the same way, so they had a purpose. And then as I read, I stopped and I would either explain what I was thinking or I would explain what I was questioning. So I may have said, I wonder why does the boy stop visiting the tree as he gets older? And then I would talk about how I need to answer that question as a reader. Or I would just say, you know what, this makes me think. And I would go in and explain my thinking process and then go back to the text. And then we did a quick formative assessment as an exit slip. As the slides go on, I know your copy's in black and white, but any alterations I made to the intervention, I put in red. So I did the exact same thing the second day, except as I said before, I focused more on that text evidence, and I made sure to clarify misconceptions immediately. So if the student said something that was a little too far-fetched, I had to bring them back to the text. Now, where do you find that? What can you show me? Can you point to the evidence? And that really made a difference. Also, with my assessment, the exit slip I did the first time did not have any kind of scaffolding supports for writing. This time I provided that, and their work was so much stronger. And the third time I put it in there, that I did the intervention, I gave students time before we actually talked as a group to write down what they were thinking to the inference and then share out. That kept them from sharing ideas too soon and actually being able to develop their independent ideas. I scored every day's assessment on a scale of 1 to 4, 4 being distinguished, 3 proficient, 2 apprentice, 1 novice. Here is the data that I collected. For the most part, most students were able to grow as the process went on. I noticed that day 3 was when I provided those writing supports. And look at their scores, so much better. So that was a big takeaway. Those writing supports, I really think, helped them show their learning. But I was very impressed overall because for the most part, we saw growth in how the students were thinking. This chart is more detailed. For me, it's more helpful as a teacher because all the notes that I took during the intervention and afterwards, quick jotting before I moved on, is all there. And I have specific things I need to work on with each student. I have a couple students that are really strong at making inferences, but they're very simple. The character is sad. What type of sad? There are different shades of sad. Let's expand that more. I had a few students who struggled with elaboration, taking it and explaining their thinking more, and then some social and behavioral issues may have impacted their scores, but overall they did show growth, and I was very impressed with the results. Here's a graph that shows how each student grew. Light blue is their pre-assessment. For the 4th graders, it was their common assessment. For the 5th graders, it was that first day when we read Ish. And as you can see, almost every student showed growth between the pre and the post. I added in a second graph just because for me, it's a lot cleaner and I can actually point to where I see growth. So for each student, we have the blue as their pre, green as their post, and we can see how the post scored higher than the pre. As a summary, the implementation of this intervention of Think-Alouds showed that it was effective. The data showed that it really did help the students kind of plan their thinking and learn how to question themselves and think to themselves as they read. What I noticed more than anything is that students were more confident in it. By the 4th day, students would say, well, you know, I think, and I could tell they were starting to use my language, which was really great because that helped them go into their thoughts a little bit deeper. The inferences that they were making as they went on were stronger. So it wasn't just, she's sad. It's, she's sad because her wing is burnt and she can't fly, and that's what she wants to do. They were able to expand a little bit more. And honestly, my proficiency in Think-Alouds increased because at first I was really struggling with how do I tell them what I'm thinking when I don't even know what I'm thinking. And so by the time I got to the 4th read aloud, I felt much more comfortable explaining my thinking and supporting it with evidence. Adjustments and reflection. These are the things that I changed as I went and I noticed really made a difference. Direct instruction, demonstrating your thinking and explaining why the inference was important. Once I started pulling in real world examples, they were much more cooperative to work. Like, it wasn't something foreign. So when we talked about, you know, reading people's emotions on their faces, they wanted to participate more. They felt more comfortable because they do it all the time. Citing textual evidence was a big change that I made from implementation 1 to 2. That kept the students more focused on the text and not taking their inferences too far. And then pulling specific support from the text. One thing I found was very beneficial was allowing students to interact with me, allowing them to share their thoughts. That way I could pull it back to the text and say, well, where did you see that? And we could model their thinking as well as mine. And then, of course, correcting misconceptions as I went. It really did help by that fourth read aloud to have the students write down their ideas before we shared them, because before that, they kind of piggybacked on everybody else's idea, and they didn't get to be independent thinkers. And finally, obstacles in the assessment, such as writing, that needed to be addressed probably early on and have more scaffolds to help them feel more confident in their answers. So next steps, I want to keep doing this. Miss Mel and I switched intervention groups, so I'm trying this on a different group, trying to see how they grow with it. So far it's going really well. I would like to eventually get to the point where they're leading the Think Aloud and I'm just kind of adding in things and facilitating. Our students really struggle with informational texts, so once we feel more confident with these literature texts, I'd like to move on to looking closely at scientific articles and historical articles and trying to get them thinking this way with all texts. As you can see on the anecdotal note slide, students need very different things in order to improve. So I'd like to focus more on individual skills and make even our small group even more differentiated. And then I want to improve as a teacher my read aloud, think aloud abilities, because it's still a struggle. It's still very difficult for me to stop and explain my thinking, because it's very counterintuitive. You're not used to stopping and explaining how you understand a story. All right. So that's my intervention presentation. Are there any questions? Love. Thank you so much for letting me present to you and take up your morning. Please eat some donuts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.